Al Jazeera Podcasts.
Today, what Palestinians forced to flee Gaza carried with them and what they left behind.
These objects are kind of relics in a way. Even though the genocide is ongoing, these objects are already relics.
2 years into Israel's war, Palestinians who have escaped the genocide try to look forward while holding on to mementos of the past. I'm Malika Bilal, and this is The Take. Before we go on with today's episode, I want to ask for your support. The Take is nominated for the Signal Awards in the Best Daily Podcast category, and Al Jazeera's True Crime Reports is nominated for Most Innovative Video Podcast and Best True Crime Podcast. While we wait for the judges' decisions, you can help us win the listeners' vote. The links for voting are included in this episode's description. Vote, and thank you.
My name is Danya Issawi. I'm a writer at The Cut. I do a mix of culture writing, some fashion writing, and then recently I've been covering Gaza a lot.
Well, that is why it is so nice to have you, a mix of all of those things that I know our listeners and viewers are interested in. And of course, right now, the heaviest amongst them is that writing on Gaza. Mm-hmm. So, Danya, welcome to The Take. Thank you for being here. It is not an easy task to leave Gaza right now, and it's become even more difficult to leave as Israel's genocide and forced displacement has gone on. But you were able to speak with 5 Palestinian women who managed to escape Gaza in the early months, and their stories were featured in an article that you wrote for New York Magazine's The Cut called, "I Wanted to Have Something to Give My Daughter from Gaza." And your question for them was what they decided to take with them. So talk to me about the genesis behind this story. What was the inspiration?
So I have a necklace that I wear every day from a fabulous Palestinian designer, Noor, and it's in the shape of a key. And I have that necklace because in the Palestinian diaspora, the key is a symbol of resistance in a way and a promise to return. A lot of our grandparents took their keys from their house in the Nakba. And I was like fiddling with my necklace and I was like, my grandparents took their keys, but I also don't know what else they took. And I was just thinking about all of the women in Gaza and they had like minutes to flee. And I'm curious what they took with them, what they looked around in their homes or what was left of them and tried to grab before they were able to get out. And so I was just curious about this, unfortunately, new generation of Palestinians joining the diaspora and what their symbol of resistance might be, what their symbol of a promise to return might be, what their symbol of Gaza might be.
So there is a personal aspect to this story. And of course, it's that story about the key that you just shared and held up. But I know there was also a pragmatic reason, right? Because you're a journalist in this industry and have been for a while. Mm-hmm. And you know what causes people to care, especially when it's something that they don't seem like they might care about otherwise. Can you walk me through that?
You know, as a Palestinian living in the U.S., living in the West, I see every day how Palestinians are dehumanized in the public eye. And I think something everyone can relate to is the concept of stuff. Everybody owns stuff. Everybody has something that is likely sentimental to them. And I think when you relate to somebody through perhaps an object that they own and hear the story that that object carries, I think that puts you in their shoes a little bit more easily than it does, you know, perhaps witnessing the horrific images that we're seeing every day, because those images are so far from the reality of what the rest of this world is living in. And I think hearing about somebody's blanket that their mom gave them, you know, so many people have a blankie from when they were babies. It's like, I have a blankie, you know? So I was thinking about that bridge between the object and the person and the bridge that would create between, you know, the women who left Gaza and people that would be reading this in the West.
Yeah. Well, you started your piece with the things that Palestinian families took with them when they were forced from their homes by Israeli forces back in 1948. What is different about this time around, and how is that expressed in what people took with them? Of course, knowing that those families that fled back in 1948 were not able to return.
Mm-hmm. The thing that I'm finding different, or that I found different, was the first generation of Palestinian refugees in 1948. They all left with the premise of, well, we're going to come back, right? It was, we're taking our house keys so we can go back home. But when I was talking to the women in Gaza, it was fascinating because so many of them just knew that they wouldn't return, or they knew that what they were going to return to was not going to exist anymore. And so the things they took were the most precious items to them. And it wasn't even like the family's gold or, it was pictures of loved ones that had been killed. It was rings that their mothers had given them. It was a gift from one of their students. It was things that connected them to the people that they were either leaving behind in Gaza or that had been killed already. And that was almost more devastating to me, because the key to me is a symbol of hope. And a lot of these images were symbols of remembrance. I was just in awe of the woman I was speaking to. And that's kind of beside the point.
But Danya, I don't know if that's beside the point, because as a reader, I was also in awe of the strength that these women carried and the importance of something that might seem mundane at the time that you get it or the time it's made, but carries such a weight later. And I think when you look at aerial footage of Gaza right now, it shows this landscape that looks completely destroyed, just rubble and dust. In fact, President Trump even suggested at one point that the U.S. could take ownership of Gaza and, quote unquote, level the site.
What do they have? It is a big pile of rubble right now. I mean, have you seen the pictures of it? Have you been there? It's terrible to live.
But it's more than that. You talked to a woman named Tasneem, whose house was destroyed in the war. Can you tell me her story and what she took?
Tasneem is so amazing. She left Gaza a week before the Rafah crossing closed. And when she left, her mom was supposed to follow her the week after. And as we know, the crossing closed and her mom was unable to follow her. And when she left Gaza, she took with her a blanket that her mom had crocheted for her. It's like this patchwork blanket that she had made by hand.
The blanket reminds me of my mom. She made it herself. It also brings back memories of our chats after I got home from work while she sat crocheting.
And they would watch like YouTube vlogs together. And I asked Tasneem, I was like, did you ever try and get into crocheting too? And she was like, girl, no, I did not have the fingers for it. She was like, it was not for me. Luckily, her mom is still alive. And that's what I loved about these objects, is it gave so many of these women an opportunity to speak about their loved ones. And she was telling me, even though her mom was having trouble finding food for herself, when she would find milk, she would go and put it out in the street for the stray kittens to feed them. And she told me her mom, she was like a superwoman, like all the moms in Gaza. Tasneem also took this little stained glass figurine that one of her students gave her. She was a teacher, and she loved teaching, and her students loved her, and several of her students have been killed or passed away. And so, talking with her as she's grappling with her family being far away, with, her students being far away, some of them having been horrifically affected. She also took rubble from her house. She loved to read, and her room, she told me, was like an oasis, and she had books and shelves, and she just took a few rocks from her room just to remember what it had looked like before it was bombed.
More with Danya after the break.
A young woman killed a stranger in South Korea because of her obsession with true crime stories. Her curiosity for dark tales became a deadly impulse to try out one of her own. Is the media responsible? Does true crime harm more than it helps? Hear the full story on True Crime Reports.
So one of the stories that stood out for me was Zahra. 27 years old, and she carried a flash drive of her wedding photos and also her daughter's hospital bracelet. And that stuck out because I now have 3 kids, and I took each one of their hospital bracelets, and they're in a little drawer. And they're kind of random, but when I look at them, I smile. And so I can imagine what she was thinking. Can you talk to me about what stood out for you about her story or another that really stuck in your brain?
Honestly, the part that stuck out to me was her willingness to talk about how the genocide has degraded her relationship with her husband. And she was like, we didn't really get to enjoy our marriage. We immediately got thrusted into this genocide. And when her and her daughter left, her husband chose to stay behind. He didn't want to leave Gaza. He didn't want the Strip to be occupied. He figured if enough people stayed, they couldn't occupy it. And, now 2 years later, it's like their relationship has become strained because he's there trying to find food every day, and he feels a sense of abandonment, and she feels guilty that she left him behind. And so it shows the like human strain on like a relational level that I think is overlooked when a genocide is taking place and people are dying. Another one that stuck out to me, and I cried every single time I was reading it when we were doing edits, was Samia's story. Early on in the genocide, her sister's apartment was bombed, and her sister and both of Samia's nieces died. They were killed. And just a few months before, she had taken them to this festival for Eid, and she had gotten them gifts. And during Eid, she gave them a picture of the 2 girls as a gift. And after her sister's house was bombed, she went to the house looking for the girls, and she found the picture of the girls instead. And she brought it with her. She lives in an apartment in Cairo now. And she said she says good morning to it and good night every day. I'm getting emotional just talking about it. Because she wants it to feel like the girls are still with her. Like they're all going to sleep together in the same house. And it just made me so emotional every time just thinking about how empty that must feel for her, but also how amazing it is that she wants to keep their memory alive. I just was like, oh my God, you are so strong. Like, you are really such a good aunt, such a good aunt. Those girls were so lucky. So obviously that story stuck out to me.
Yeah, of course. And you're not the only one. I know several members of our team talked about our tears in reading that story in particular. And there are other parts of it that are just really striking that I want to share. She explains that 90 people were killed in that strike in which her family members were killed. She says its military, speaking of Israel, has thermal imaging technology on its drones, and operators can see warm bodies inside buildings. They would have known the house was occupied at the time, and they would have known it was inhabited by children. And I think that almost hurts that much more. I wonder how were you able to make a comfortable scenario in which she could share a story this heart-wrenching?
I just wanted these women to know that I just wanted to hear what they had to say. And I think so many of these women were more than willing to share about their loved ones and keep their loved ones' memory alive, and also, call attention to Gaza, because even though each of these women is going through something, they all still want people to pay attention to Gaza. And, throughout the course of our interviews, I just wanted them to know that, this was a safe space for them to be able to, go there. And that if they needed to take a break for a few days to process something that was going on or just didn't feel like talking, that was totally okay. And, I just wanted their stories to lead wherever they would lead. There was no end place that they needed to get to, or no right answers, obviously. And so I feel like that helped build trust between us.
How were you able to get in touch with these specific women?
I reached out to a few aid workers who were doing grassroots organizing in Cairo. to see if they knew any women who would be willing to speak with me. And I also reached out to a few friends that I have that have family in Gaza or that have fled Gaza to see if they had anybody in their outer circles that would be willing to chat.
So walk us through, if you could, that thread that you're reaching out to aid workers because right now, so these women have fled the worst experience of their lives. They've ended up in Cairo safe, but without anything, without the infrastructure, without the family, without the support, without the money. What do you know about their circumstances when it comes to fleeing and what they flee to?
I think it's a little all over the place. Some of the women were pretty open about their living situations and saying that they were living in tiny apartments now with several family members or entirely alone. A lot of them have GoFundMes that they're seeking aid through. A lot of them are seeking healthcare. One of the women gave birth during the course of our interview process. The thing that stuck out to me was their living situation never seemed as much of an issue as daunting to them as being separated from their family was. That was something that kept coming up when they were talking about their living situations. It's like that they were living alone versus they had been living with family before. And so they are, they're living in Cairo, they're safe for the most part. And still, it's like that separation from their family is what kept coming up in the conversations and struck me. One of the women was saying, like, we're strangers in Cairo. Like we've been welcomed into Cairo and yet we're still strangers. We don't have family here. We don't have friends here. We don't have a network here. And I can't imagine what that feels like to be like, okay, I have to find a new community.
Yeah. Well, I'm wondering about the reception to the piece and what you've heard from people personally, but also what you've seen from people online, because, of course, The Cut posts snippets of its stories online and on Instagram. I know the comments under at least one of those places. So this is the online version. On Zahra's story, we talked about the fact that she carried a flash drive of her wedding photos and her daughter's hospital bracelet. And in some of the comments below, people took issue with the fact that she described how beautiful her wedding was and that her wedding was full of roses. And someone wrote that showed the lie that Gaza was ever an open-air prison if she could have a big, beautiful hall and roses at her wedding. And I'm wondering what you make of the reactions you've seen or you've gotten, or do you ignore them all?
What's funny is I don't read the comments on the stories.
Ever.
Sometimes I'll peek and I'm like, I shouldn't do that. And I think that's so disgusting and crass in a way to hate the fact that this woman had flowers on her wedding day. And I think that kind of goes back to my point of Palestinians being so dehumanized in the West that it's unfathomable that a woman wanted to have roses on her wedding day, that she wanted to have a beautiful wedding day. And that blows my mind. But beyond that, the reception that I saw online on Instagram and in my circles was very warm and positive, and kind of emotional. But anyone reacting negatively to somebody quite literally sharing their story of displacement and dispossession and loss and grief, I just feel like that person really needs to just look in a mirror and be like, why does that bother me? Why is that triggering to me?
Well, Danya, you are the daughter of Palestinian refugees. What did you learn about inheritance that you didn't already know?
I think being the daughter of refugees, or even maybe immigrants in this country, everything feels sentimental to me. Everything I touch or everything that has memory to it, I must keep. I must hold on to because I don't want to lose it. Also, for context, as a child, we had a house fire as well. And I was 7 at the time, and I have such a sharp memory of all the objects that made it out of the fire.
Wow.
And so from that point on, every time I decide an object is meaningful or important to me, I'm like, must keep, must cherish. And as you get older, those things accumulate. And through these conversations with these women, I realized that not everything holds as much meaning as I need it to. The shoes I wore 2 years ago on a trip to Copenhagen, actually, that doesn't really mean as much to me as, a necklace my mom gave me or bracelets that my grandma set aside to be passed down to me, or, a book that my dad read to me as a child. So I think it reframed a lot of things for me in terms of what is important to me as a person, both, object-wise, but also value-wise. Again, so many of these women were just talking about their families and their friends, and it just recontextualized so much of what is important to me in this life. And, I really just valued my friendships and my relationships and my family so much more after those conversations, even more than I already did.
Danya, Issawi, thank you so much for this.
Thank you. Thank you.